Welcome back. In this case, we travel about 2.5 hours south of my hometown of Port Pirie in South Australia to the central business district of the state capital, Adelaide, and the bomb that was sent to Detective Sergeant Jeffrey Bowen at the National Crime Authority building. In the early 1990s, Detective Bowen had been seconded from Western Australia to South Australia to work in covert operations involving the crop growing operation, cultivation, trafficking and distribution of cannabis, as well as the importation of other illicit drugs by the Calabrian Mafia family in Australia. The presence of the Calabrian Mafia in Australia can be traced as far back as the arrival of the ship Re d'Italia into Melbourne on the 18th of December 1922. Among the arrivals were men connected to the Italian Calabrian Mafia, or 'Ndrangheta, with such names as Barbaro, Strano and Pere, names that would become well known to police within a few short years, and the vessel would soon be dubbed as the ship that brought the Mafia to Australia. Australia is one of the few countries in the world where the Calabrian Mafia exists alone, without Sicilian and other Italian mafia groups, and it's unique in that the family are actually that, bloodlines, with business and rank usually passed down between generations. The family branched out along the eastern states and into South Australia, but was at first predominant in Victoria, beginning its stronghold by controlling the flow of fruit and vegetable produce into the local markets. Calabrian groups were able to set prices and monopolise, a racket which would eventually create a stranglehold on the fruit and vegetable industry. Thrown in for good measure, extortion was utilised every step of the way, overcharging buyers, underpaying sellers, exorbitant fees for services, and imposing right to operate payments, basically charging stallholders for the right to their position at the market. The same standover tactics were used in the New South Wales seafood industry, before branching into illegal cannabis crops and later methamphetamines. In an interesting side note, I was stunned to discover that in 2006 it was revealed that supermarket giants Coles and Woolworths had been extorted from the mid-1960s to the early 1990s, paying 50 cents a case on fruit and vegetables from suppliers nominated by the Calabrian Mafia. A Coles executive told police that the extortion had cost the supermarket chain at least $5 million a year. The scheme was broken after Frank Costa took over the supply of fruit and vegetables. The Riverina, an agricultural region of southwestern New South Wales, became a major area in the crop growing operation, with cannabis plants hidden amongst the vineyards and orchards that thrived there. In the 1970s, local anti-drug crusader and Liberal candidate Don Mackay took a stand against the illegal activities and supplied covert information on the whereabouts of major marijuana crops, making him a target, particularly his disclosure to police in 1975 of a then Australian record crop worth more than $100 million at today's prices. He was gunned down in a Griffith Hotel parking lot in 1977 and his body never discovered, making him Australia's first political assassination. However, his efforts had been enough to disrupt the Riverina operation, and new crop growing areas were found, including South Australia and the Northern Territory. In 1982, Victorian police arrested Gianfranco Tizzoni with a boot full of marijuana. Tizzoni was found to be the Society's main drug distributor in Victoria, and in 1983 he became a supergrass. Tizzoni named James Basley as the hitman who had murdered Donald Mackay, and named principals and members of the Ndrangheta in Victoria. He also informed police that the Society had infiltrated policing, politics and public offices throughout Australia. The information was presented in a 1985 BCI report. However, staffing levels and a lack of resources prevented the BCI from taking any action on the information. By 1984, the National Crime Authority, or NCA, was established, an Australian law enforcement agency intended to lead a national law enforcement response to organised crime, which could overcome the jurisdictional barriers of the Australian federal system. It had extraordinary powers, removing any of the barriers which prevented other enforcement organisations from being able to comprehensively investigate or prosecute. In 1994, Detective Sergeant Jeffrey Bowen, a husband and father of 2 small boys, was a senior investigator on a task force targeting Italian organised crime within Australia, known as Operation Cerebus. He was running the operation investigating the Hidden Valley plantation in the Northern Territory, where Antonio Pereira arrived in Australia from Italy on a temporary visa. Pereira was in Darwin for only a matter of a few days before he was driven to the plantation as it was being harvested on a large cattle station owned by former South Australian footballer Dean Ottens. Ottens and 10 other men, 8 of them Italians, were caught red-handed when police officers and agents from the Combined Drug Enforcement Unit raided the Hidden Valley station on August 22, 1993. 2 others were arrested 40 kilometres from the property after being intercepted in a van loaded with cannabis worth $500,000. The arrests were the culmination of months of clandestine investigation by the NCA and a covert week-long surveillance operation by police of the men tending and harvesting the marijuana plants. When Otten and his co-accused first appeared in the Northern Territory Supreme Court, the Italians were refused bail because they were linked to the Calabrian Mafia. Ottens and 2 other Australian men were freed. Bail had already been refused 2 weeks earlier after the police told the court investigations into the crops were continuing in 3 states and in Europe, particularly Italy. Detective Sergeant Bowen was immediately contacted and given the details of the arrests, as well as the connection of 2 of the arrested, Antonio and Francesca Pereira, as the uncle and brother of Adelaide's family kingpin, Dominic Pereira. Warrants were issued, and on the 6th of September 1993, Jeffrey Bowen raided Pereira's home. A week later, Bowen called him in for questioning. With a $20 million loss after the Hidden Valley bust and under constant surveillance, Dominic Pereira was feeling the heat, and he was furious. By March 1994, the case was finalised, and Pereira was due to face court. These are the events that unfolded on March 2nd, 1994. At just after 7 a.m, Mr. Brian Stone, who was employed at the NCA as a security services officer, attended the General Post Office and collected the NCA's mail for the day. There was a red card in the post office box indicating that a package was to be collected from the counter. It was addressed to NCA, Jeffrey Bowen. Stone carried the parcel back to his office under his arm. Arriving at his desk, he entered the mail in the record book, noting that the sender's name was IBM Promotions. Bowen's work area was on the 11th floor of the building. At around 9 a.m, he telephoned Stone, inquiring if some packages he'd been expecting had arrived. In fact, he'd been expecting the return of some exhibits from Canberra, which he proposed to use in the prosecution of Pereira the following day. Bowen went up to the 12th floor. When he saw the parcel, he told Stone that he hadn't been expecting anything from IBM. Because that made it unsolicited mail, Stone decided to scan the package, using a handheld Garrett super scanner, the type commonly seen at airports. He tested the scanner by passing it over his wristwatch, ascertaining that it was working correctly, and then scanned the package by waving the scanner over the top and down one side. The scanner did not sound an alarm, so Stone handed the package to Bowen, who then went into the office of his friend and colleague, lawyer Peter Wallace, which was on the same floor. Wallace later said that the package consisted of a yellow, red and white plastic express post pack. Bowen placed it on the desk and opened the parcel. Wallace said that it had very neat writing, as if stencilled. After opening the plastic outer covering, Bowen looked inside and said, with tragic irony, "It might be a bomb." After examining the package further, he added, "Well, there are no wires." He then removed the cardboard box from within the plastic pack and, using scissors, proceeded to open the cardboard by breaking the masking tape seal. Wallace described what then happened as follows. "There was a loud crack like a rifle shot or something similar, and I remember Jeff letting out a strangled type cry, a yell, and falling sideways. And then, it must have been almost instantaneously, there was an enormous buffeting, like wind buffeting, an enormous sound that I can only describe as very, very loud static. I was immediately blinded. That was the last thing I saw." Sergeant M.J. Thomas of the Sapole Crime Scene Unit attended the scene soon after the explosion and was closely involved in the ensuing investigation. He described the effect of the explosion as follows. "It shattered furnishings that the device was resting on. The pressure wave obviously broke out of the southern window, but it also travelled upwards towards the ceiling, above which was a concrete slab, and the pressure wave then travelled along underneath that slab, between the slab and the ceiling, so it knocked down all the suspended ceiling and the air conditioning ducting. It cracked gyprock interior walls and an adjacent toilet block. The explosion caused the door to Wallace's office to slam shut, and it would appear that the ceiling had fallen down behind it, so that it could not be easily opened. The witnesses described the desperate attempts to open the door, involving Scott Work, John Ganley, Brian Stone, Mark Kasmerick, Jeff Smith and Mike Schultz. After they were finally able to force the door open, they found Wallace standing against a wall. He was obviously burnt and severely injured. He was escorted out of the office and fire extinguishers were obtained. Bowen was found lying in a corner of the room shortly afterwards. Fire and ambulance crews arrived within minutes. The ambulance officers record that their arrival was at about 9:24 a.m. Bowen had been dragged from the burning office into a corridor. When examined, he still had a pulse and was spontaneously breathing, although it was apparent to the ambulance officer that his injuries were unsurvivable. A laryngeal mask was inserted, but soon afterwards he stopped breathing. He was ventilated using a bag, but at 9:38 hours it was noted that there was no pulse, no heart sounds, and no breathing effort. In consultation with Dr. W.M. Griggs, the Director of Trauma Services at the Royal Adelaide Hospital and head of the retrieval team in attendance, resuscitation was discontinued at 9:39 hours, and Dr. Griggs pronounced Jeffrey Bowen's life extinct. Wallace was conveyed to the Royal Adelaide Hospital, arriving at 9:41 a.m. He suffered trauma to both eyes and severe burn injuries. He had also suffered a number of small penetrating injuries as a result of the blast. He had to undergo a succession of operations and other medical procedures since that time and will suffer permanent disability as a result of his injuries. 2 blocks away, drug criminal Dominique Perret makes his way up a multi-storey car park. Undercover police spotted Perret standing there after the bombing, staring straight across at the devastation in the National Crime Authority office. The assassination of Detective Jeffrey Bowen left 2 sons without a father. 8,000 mourners attended his funeral, and just moments after his casket was lowered, news came through that Dominic Pereira had been charged with his murder. A search of Pereira's home had found items similar to those used in the bomb. On the day of the explosion, he was seen watching the bombed building from a nearby car park, and a star witness detailed that Pereira had gave him weapons and bomb-making equipment to hide, including 2 detonators identical to those used in the bomb. But in the dock, the witness proves unreliable. Evidence was deemed circumstantial, and 6 months after Jeff Bowen's murder, the charges against Pereira were dropped. The bombing became one of the state's highest profile cases, and in 2008 a reward of $1 million was issued for information leading to the conviction of the person or people responsible. A cold case review that South Australian Police have called their largest and most comprehensive to date was launched in September 2016. A joint investigation by a number of state and federal authorities, including Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, along with the Director of Public Prosecutions, conducted a review of the evidence. SA Police revealed advancements in technology had assisted the renewed investigation into the bombing. They found the makeup of the bomb and technological improvements meant it was possible to locate DNA on remnants of the device, which could be later checked against the profiles of possible suspects. 65 items were sent to the world-leading Forensic Institute in the Netherlands for further investigation, while partial DNA profiles and fingerprints were recovered from other crucial exhibits. Calabrian Mafia senior member Dominic Pereira was officially charged with the murder of Detective Sergeant Jeffrey Bowen on March 2nd this year, 2018, just 1 day short of the 24th anniversary of the bombing. Pereira is in custody and a trial date is yet to be set. The National Crime Authority was abolished in 2002 and replaced by the Australian Crime Commission, which continues the work of uncovering illegal activities of the Calabrian Mafia network in Australia. Also in March this year, South Australian Police raided the Salisbury property of Dominic's son, Anthony Pereira, a lawyer with his own Adelaide legal firm, and charges were laid after police allegedly found an elaborate irrigation system used to grow cannabis plants, alongside more than 45,000 rounds of military ammunition. Legal Profession Conduct Commissioner Greg May is investigating Pereira's conduct and may suspend his licence. At the same time, a raid was conducted on the Chaffey property of Dominic's brother, Francesco Pereira, near the South Australian-New South Wales border. Francesco, his wife Rita and their son Antonio were each charged with 1 count of cultivating cannabis with the intention to sell, possessing prescribed equipment, trafficking in a commercial quality of cannabis, failing to keep firearms secured, as well as 2 counts of possessing a firearm. Francesco has pleaded guilty and sentenced to a minimum of 3 years. His wife and son are yet to be tried. You can follow the outcome of these trials by Googling NCA bombings or Dominic Pereira. Thank you for watching, and please help me out in the YouTube world by clicking on the like button before you go. Subscribe if you'd like to be notified of more murder, mystery and mayhem. Until next time.